All right, everybody. My name is Jeff Schoeman. I own and operate Jeffys Fab Farm. I've been a builder and driver for 27 years, and I've been doing the fabrication, automotive parts, aftermarket sales and distribution now for close to 15 years. Last year I did a quick seminar on beginner drivers, teaching track awareness and track positioning and turning left and making smart decisions on the track. I decided this year to touch on something that I get phone calls a lot, multiple calls a week, and this is transmission fitment, and transmission interchangeability on the LS engines and some of the parts that we supply. We're also going to do questions and answers, and there's no such thing as a dumb question. So the only question that's dumb is the one you don't ask, because I'm here to help everybody. Most guys know I'm on the phone every night trying to help everybody that can make it to the track. I don't know everything. I learn every day, just like you guys. And sometimes the right question can cure my curiosity or make me look into something that I've never experienced before. So let's start off with some questions, and then I'll get into things. Any questions about LS engines, fitments, carburation, conversions, fuel injections? Nothing? Well, that's easy. Okay. What I have here is a stock flex plate off of a 6.0 or for a 3/4 ton GM truck. What it is a flat flex plate with a factory crank spacer. This is what will come on any 2500 and 3500 series truck with a 6.0 or a 4.8 with a 4L60, or sorry, scratch that, 4L80 transmission behind it. Little thing I throw in my head is if you take the flex plate off, and I call this the fat crank spacer. If this is fat, if the crank is fat, the flex plate's flat. If the flex plate is dished and goes in, like this one, this is an aftermarket one that we sell. If this dish is in, the crank is thin. Crank only sticks out about 1/8 of an inch past the seal. Now, not to muddy the waters too much, but in the early 99s and 2000s, GM did something really stupid and made long crank engines. This spacer wasn't on there. That was part of the crank. That extra 400 plus thou was part of the crank. And you have to run a flat flex plate with those engines. There's no other option. But what we're going to get into is dish flex plates, torque snout extension that pilots the hub of the converter for running old school transmissions behind these LSs. The question I get in all the time is, which flex plate do I run? Which spacer do I run? And the simple answer is dished and a spacer. When you don't know, you go with dished and a spacer, and that converts the back of the block to an old school transmission. Something that we had to come up with to aid you guys in from breaking parts and not break the bank was this block saver plate. And the reason we came up with this was, as time went on and guys were running more and more old school transmission behind the LSs, they were actually breaking the blocks right here on the starter side and the opposite side. And the reason that is the transmission leans on, you've got this heavy, large 2-foot pry bar leaning on the back of the block. And if you look at the back of the LS block, the casting just comes straight out. There's no support, there's no gussets, there's no bridging. But what was happening was the block was leaning on here, breaking the blocks. So what this does is this gives you a 1/2-inch plate to support the back of the block and keep the transmission from coming in and breaking it. It's the size it is so that the promoters will let you run it in the more stock classes and doesn't allow you to tie it into the car and become a reinforcement. And after last year, 9 promoters instantly adapt the part because they knew that it was going to help the drivers use their inventory to get parts into their car and cars onto the track and not turn it into a kicker car with like a mid plate or racing and stuff like that. The other thing we did with the block saver plate is we also machined it, drilled it, and tapped it to be a BOP adapter. Does everybody know what BOP is? BOP Cadillac transmissions, Buick, Olds, Pontiac. Lots of those transmissions lying around that guys couldn't use. Put that plate on the back, you can run your BOP trans now behind an LS, and saves money, saves time, uses your inventory, what have you. These parts are fairly new for what I've come across recently. With what I've done with LSs is I've ran kicker LSs with fully braced transmissions, near-at valves, and I didn't run into the block braking issues. When I run stock, I run a standard factory option 4L60 behind my LSs, which is a full bell housing, 8 bell housing bolts, and it bolts from the oil pan all the way to the heads. And it's a far superior strengthened transmission, just in the fact that it's a full bell from factory. So I wasn't running into these block braking issues. This was something new that came out. Like I said, it's approved by a lot of promoters, and it's a very helpful plate, and we sell a lot of them. And it comes in a kit form with dowels and spacers and all that stuff. And if you're interested in one, I can talk to you all about that. This isn't about me being up here to pitch you and sell you on a product. It's more about awareness of what fits what. Because I get 3 or 4 calls a week on, what do I do with this? This doesn't line up. My converter's jammed up. I can't get spacers in. I need to shim my starter. On an LS, if you get into any situation where you think you need to shim a starter like an old school block, stop. Their machining has changed in the last 20 years. All the tolerances are tighter. Everything's a lot more precise. There is no more shimming of starters. There's no 2 different flex plates, diameter-wise, like there is with the small blocks. Different patterns and all that stuff. It's that diameter ring gear, and it's 1 starter. So if you need to shim or modify or brace or make something, just stop, because something's gone askew. So the reason we sell this flex plate, a couple of different reasons. There's 4 different patterns on that transmission, or on that flex plate, sorry, for all the different converters. 350-400 converters, 4L80 converters, the 6 pattern ones, the 4L60 converters. Also, it's a solid flex plate. It's an SFI drag racing certified flex plate, chromoly. Because what we found is over time, you get some hard runs in these hard cars, this flex plate flexes enough that we've gotten motors back to freshen up, and the converter bolts have actually chewed up the back of the block. Because this is waffling when you're hitting a car. So we need to actually strengthen up that part of the car. So we offer that drag racing flex plate. So it gives you the availability of multi-converter use, and it's just a superior product. Lost that train of thought wherever that was going. All right, let's answer some questions. If something's popped up in the last, Ken.
Will that adapter plate work on a small block too, also? Or
It will work on a small block. We can, because the bolt pattern itself hasn't changed since 1958.
Right.
It's the same 6 bolts. You can only use 5 on the LS, but the 6th one is there for a small block. The only advantage you don't have, it is a BOP adapter that you can use for a small block.
That's what I'm thinking.
The only advantage you don't have is you can't tie it into the oil pan on a small block. I've been told already that guys have welded another piece to this and made a bolt-in fixture and
Like the dust cover?
the dust cover from a 4L80, and they want to tie all that in and at least just have that little bit of material down there. And I understand what that's about. Yes, the 6 bolts are this. The pattern is the same. Oh, excuse me. Any other questions?
So with that plate, Jeff, you don't, if I was running a 4L60, I don't need to run that plate?
You don't need to run that plate. It would be a redundant piece. You would have to space the transmission back for no reason whatsoever. Basically, we took the full bell housing, I wouldn't even know what the terminology we would use. The engineering strength of the full bell housing and had to somehow tie that in to help the block with using that old school transmission. Now, the other thing that we do, and I wanna put this video up, Alex is gonna give me this video, I'm gonna put this on my website. And what I'm gonna do is I'll put a picture of a link, I don't have one here. A lower dust shield off of a 4L80 transmission can be added to an old school transmission with some bolts through the tapered spot where the dust cover would go. It's a cast aluminum piece from factory, and it would tie into the oil pan. So you add 2 bolts on each side of the sandwich angle, and then 2 more to the oil pan. And it's not quite a full housing for, say, a Turbo 400 for a 350, but at least gives you some support so that there's not just the void. It's at least there to even hold it up or support it. And you can tie that into the oil pan. I would use a block saver plate with that. Like I said, the biggest thing is if it's a flat flex plate, it had a 4L80 behind it. If it's a dish flex plate, it had a 4L60. If you're running old school transmission, you have to use everything that you would use that a 4L80 requires. They basically took a 4L80, GM basically took a Turbo 400, added overdrive, and made it it's a little different pump and converter, but for argument's sake, the gear ratios and stuff, the output shaft, all that stuff, Turbo 400, and added overdrive and put it behind those engines. A 4L60 has a couple advantages over the old school transmissions. Biggest thing is full bell housing. Number 2, they handle the RPM because they have a different style pump inside of them. We make a shifter for them, and the yoke that you require for a 4L60 is the same output shaft as a Turbo 350. So Turbo 350 and 4L60 share parts, and the Turbo 400 and the 4L80 share parts. GM usually doesn't stray too far from what works. Yes?
You need an ECM to run either one of them transmissions?
You need power to run either a 4L60 or a 4L80 as they sit. You can run a fully manual valve body on either drag racing stuff and do it that way. Or you can run just a transmission controller like, I'm drawing a blank. There's a couple companies out there that make them. And most guys that know me I prefer EFI. For me, that's a huge advantage because I literally take a 2-wheel drive truck, pull the driveline right out, 4L60, 4.8, 5.3, doesn't matter. Plug everything in, transmission at all, full bell housing, low first gear, the right ratio, it'll scream, the pump will handle the RPM, drop that right in my car.
I also been told if you use the Turbo 400, you need a good cooler, possible dump valve, and like a nitrous converter to keep it from thrusting forward, taking out their crank bearing.
The biggest thing with LSs or even highly modified small blocks and stock transmissions, why guys go through transmissions the way they do, is in a standard Turbo 400, Turbo 350, I don't know how much guys know about pumps, but a transmission pump in those old school transmissions is what they call a gear rotor pump. It's a constant displacement pump. It's a gear inside a body that puts out, the faster you spin it, the more fluid it puts out. The modern transmissions have what they call a variable vane type transmission
Basically
pump.
like the turbo setup on
And
this car.
once it builds so much pressure or so much fluid, it bleeds the rest off. There isn't a factory transmission out there, and if Alex posts this, somebody's probably gonna be like, but whatever. Just for a constant. There isn't a factory turbo 350 or 400 out there that's meant to handle 6,000, 7,000 RPM. And the LS is RPM so high and so fast, it just kills the pumps of these transmissions. So what I was told by my transmission guy back in Canada, Dave Tink, who you know, Nicole, he said the first thing you gotta do is you have to open up the return circuit because that fluid has to go somewhere. They were never built for that. So step 1 was open up the return circuit, open up the loop circuit because you're spinning this thing faster than it's ever been, and you can't even use a paper filter. Screen filters only, because it will literally, the paper can't flow the fluid and it will suck it dry. And I've talked to many Derby transmission guys, and 95% of them have agreed with me, so I know I'm not talking out my butt. It just comes to fluid dynamics and where it's going and what it's doing. And unless you had some crazy 69 302 small block that saw 6,200 RPM, these transmissions were never meant to handle any of that. So it's not about, here's the parts, here's what you need to use. I want to see guys go out, not cook their transmission they just put $1,000 into because they weren't aware, or even their transmission guy didn't know. Tell this guy it's going to spend 6,500. He has to know this, you know, and it's not about the horsepower or the torque or whatever. It's just pure RPM. And they get there like that. And the fluid has to go somewhere. So that was excellent. Yes. Anybody else?
What if you lose power to the 6L80 or whatever?
It 4L60 with no power defaults, it takes off in second gear. It will function as a transmission, but it will eventually burn off.
But won't that, can't you pull it down into first?
It will not go there.
It won't,
No.
because that's like.
Without that solenoid energized, it just dumps fluid. So there is a kit where you go in and you bypass that solenoid and it'll give you first gear. You can physically do it. Company called Transgo makes a kit. It's called a 60 mod or something like that. And you buy this kit and it gives you first gear manual. I've got a customer that's trying behind carbureted setups. You can power one solenoid and it will give you first gear and put it on a switch, give them second gear, right? Turn the power off to it, gives you second gear. The problem is it doesn't build up the pressure. So when it does shift, it's a sloppy shift. And anybody that's been in this industry a while knows a sloppy shift creates heat. Heat creates problems. And next thing your transmission's burning up.
Basically, a slip shift then.
It's a slip shift, yeah. It'll do it, but it ain't happy. So what we do with the EFI is we turn up. It's a electronic pressure valve, and we actually boost the line pressure 25%. But I also don't let it shift. It's a first and reverse. It's done electronically because it doesn't see enough wheel speed to shift. Is what we do in the tune. But if it did shift, it would be a firm positive shift, and it has to be at such a ridiculous amount. Again, you can do it with a manual valve body, or a transmission guy says, first thing they do, Corvette servo, we're going to do this. The right transmission guy can get you through. I'm just talking about the norm. Yeah. If you have a greasy, I hate to use the term greasy, but that's the term we use. If you've got a greasy 350 or 400, and you want to put it behind an LS, it is not going to live. It just won't. They just can't. They're not meant for it. It's just too much RPM.
The trucks that came with the V6, is that the same 4L60?
It's the same 4L60 physically, electronically, everything. The bell housing and the converter is different.
The bell housing is different.
The bell housing is different. Yeah. There's been issues with the converter's actually smaller, and a regular 4L60 converter doesn't go back far enough and it hits. Something I ran into recently, I was told it may not be true, but I'm not going to say it's the same when I don't know for sure.
With the hole pattern on the bell housing, it's 4.3.
It's there, it doesn't have the top hole. That's why the bell housing is different. Yeah, and it doesn't have the lower to tie it into the oil pan. There's a nice cheater torque converter out there if you put a bit of a cam in an LS and you want a bit of a higher stall speed. The 4L60s out of the Canyons, Colorados, Envoys, that stuff where they had the 4L60s, because it was a smaller engine, they upped the stall speed. So you put that converter behind a bigger engine and it'll raise it a couple hundred RPM. And those are out there too.
Now, is there a certain year 4L60E you picked? Because I see
99.
some of them have fixed bells and some of them got bolt-on bells. Like the older ones, like I think 99 and older, have the fixed bells.
Has to be 99 and up. It has to be
Newer,
behind
okay.
an LS.
Okay.
Yeah. And anything, when they first came up with the 4L60Es, the mid-90s, those things are their own complete. Yeah, you can't use them except for an OBS truck that they're in. They're their own baby. 99 to, I think they ran them all the way up to 14.5-ton trucks. Vans is a hotbed where guys don't realize. Half-ton vans, 3/4-ton vans, these drive lines, you get them for pennies on the dollar, and they are killer. Yeah.
Do they make more torque or more power than the other ones, the normal truck ones?
Anything that's subdued, anything that's tuned down is all in the tuning. Like literally the worst 6.0 out there is actually in the Hummer, the H2. They got the lowest compression, the crappiest cams, and they're really still not crappy compared to, you know, what's out there. I've had 3 or 4 guys today ask me what heads are the best heads to have on an LS. There isn't bad ones. There really isn't. There's a few horsepower here or there, and if you go from the bottom of the barrel to the top of the heap, on the spectrum of what's available it's 40 horse, which back in the day, if you got 40 extra horse out of a small block for no money, I mean, you had the world. But with the LSs, it's all there. It's really all there. It's really, they are built really, really well. So, yeah. The biggest thing is the interchangeability of the parts. If you're gonna go old school, you have to change a few parts. You can't run a protector. I recommend the block saver. Again, not a sales pitch to, I need to sell parts. It's you don't wanna reblock this thing every 2 runs or a run or what have you. And like I said, it's that flex plate has 4 different patterns on it for all the different converters that are out there. So if you want to change, if you're running a 4L60 and you have it working the way it is, and something does happen to it, and you've got a turbo 400 sitting there, you really don't have to do anything to keep running between.
If you got a pilot of turbo 400s and you got a good training guy, could he put a different style pump in there like what's in the 4L60?
No, he has to do it internally, and I don't know enough about it. I don't know if it's in the pump, how you open up the return circuit, or if it's in the valving, in the valve body, if it's a hole you drill or a passage. I don't know enough about it.
Okay.
Transmissions, I know just enough to be dangerous.
Right.
But you cannot change that. As far as I know, I don't know if there's a pump that switches from a gerotor style pump to a variable vane. That's beyond my pay grade. I've been delved into it enough. But excellent question. You just have to tell your transmission guy, this thing will spin 6,000.
Well, like you said, get the vans, if you just think about your drive to here to home, how many Chevy Express vans have you seen sitting somewhere, and there's a perfect drive line, whether it's a 5.3 or 6.0, you can still have a training in.
A lot of times it's just having the right mating parts. I was really successful with a stock truck, ran it a bunch of times, and ran against guys that broke bells and stuff like that. Running small blocks, and I call it the half bell, the old school transmission bell. And I wasn't having issues because I was running the 4L60, and guys were asking me questions about it and how it was doing what it was doing, like how it was enduring the pace it took, and they want to know what I did to it. And it was literally like 300,000 mile Napa delivery truck out in my car. Knock on wood, hard as I can, 10 years I have not broke a 4L60.
The bells are pretty stout.
And the cars, if anybody saw my Maryland car, I put it through its paces. And that transmission's fine.
Is that with the trans mount, or like, is the trans floating?
Transmission, the pan was against the cross member, not mounted. But it was back as far as it would go. I wasn't skimping on anything. My Vegas car, that was porta powered in there just like a mod car. Buckled the floor and everything.
Pressure on that.
On that transmission. Yeah. And we've had them go right up against dash bars, break the top, a chunk, 2x2 out of the top of the bell, and still not break the bell. Take a chunk out of it, but the truck still function. So. And the cool part is if you break it here off the 4L60, like you said, 8 bolts, the housing comes off, the other one goes back on. Yeah. So
a lot of them you see in the junkyard, the top broke off because everybody doesn't know that center bolt.
the top bolt, yeah, a lot of people. Or they break around the dowels because,
Yeah.
especially in the north, they get
Yeah,
seized
they're
on
hard to
there.
separate sometimes. I had to heat the dowels and did wet start wedges in to get mine off my head.
Yep. But yeah, They're out there, they're plentiful. I hear it all the time. Oh, their 4L60s are junk. They can be. They're problematic. 2-3 shift, 3-4 shift, overdrive bands, they go. I get that. We use them first and reverse, and they work. And I've ran them in, 3/4 ton trucks in the Derby. As long as you're smart, stop, shift. Shift while the wheels are in the air, your foot's to the floor. I mean, let's all be realistic, but I'm a huge fan of them. I wanted to talk about it, and I'm gonna put this video up on my website. So hopefully people can understand the interchangeability of the parts. And like I said, the questions about flex plates are, the crank's fat, it's gotta be flat. If it's just in, it's gotta be thin. Thin amount of crank sticking out past the seal, you need a dish flex plate. So. Hopefully that helps some people. Any other questions? When are you gonna get one, Cole?
Well, I might
You have
have
the
Yeah.
filters for the
work right
transit.
now. Yeah, work right now. I might go home next week. But do you want a big cam? Like, do you prefer a big cam or slot cam?
No cams. I've pretty much, honestly, I've talked pretty much everybody about engine work. I've talked about a cams. I sell cams all the time. I have them all on the shelf. Tuning, carbureted, EFI, it doesn't matter. What happens is there's more that goes with it. It's the springs, it's the converter, it's the extra heat, it's a bigger transmission cooler. It's the whole package. So I try to make the customer aware of the package that's involved with it. So your $300 cam swap turns into a $2,500 package. And if you start scrimping out on that, I don't want to offer you something that may affect you down the road and not give you the best bang for your buck. So if you go, well, I can afford the cam and the springs, but I'm not going to buy a training cooler. Well, you just pissed away a $1,000 transmission, right? So I tell people, for the most part, that engine, half-ton truck, supposed to move a 6,800 pound four-wheel drive truck down the interstate at 100 miles an hour, towing a single car trailer at a combined weight of 12,000, 13,000 pounds maybe,
I'll go for that.
cruising down the road, right? And get good mileage. Great throttle response. We've all beat the crap out of these work trucks to death. So you got smooth idle, great performance, revs 7,000 RPM, and you're not building any more heat. You don't have to add the converter to it. You don't have to add anything. I know we all want the chop chop. We all want that sound. We all want the chop chop. But also going home at the end of the night with the big check's pretty ballsy too. So if you don't have to, what I tell guys, open them up and let the magic out, they treat you very, very well. So, sorry, you had a
Do
question?
you sell them filters for the transmission or?
No, I don't. You have to get the right parts person or the right transmission guy. And to be honest, mesh filters, the last time I looked into it, weren't as easy to get. The paper filters are easy, right? Mass produced.
Yeah.
What if you can?
So I don't know if it's a performance thing. I don't know if there's a brand. I don't know enough about it.
Okay.
So we're talking, right? You don't have to do anything on your setups.
Yeah.
Run them the way they are.
Okay.
Engine and transmission go together. You plug everything in, the way you go.
Okay.
It'll handle the RPM. It's meant for that.
Okay.
The mesh filter and the precautions you got to take on the transmissions are only the old school transmission.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can beat yours like crazy. It'll be fine.
All right.
Yeah. What are you saying, Ken?
Spin-on filter, like an inline filter for the trans.
I don't know how they get away with it, but I have seen that.
In the cooler, like in the cooler.
Yeah, in the cooler lines. Yeah.
Before it goes into
Yeah.
into the cooler.
Yeah.
What did he say? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
What's
What
that?
did he say?
He said about putting a spin-on filter in the cooler.
Okay.
Like some of the bigger ones, like the one Jay's got, the one I got, the big nasty ones, they've got an actual, I think it's a Ford oil filter that spins onto the cooler. It's very nice. Yeah, it works good.
You just have to do something for the pickup. The trans pickup.
Oh yeah, you got a stub that goes in there. That's what they do with power glides and some of the drag cars. Yeah, and they have an external filter. They check it between rounds. They flush them between rounds. They chill them between rounds. Yeah, that's the stuff I know about. Any other questions?
Is there anything else you would recommend to somebody to do to a stock setup before they put it into a derby car, other than just bolt it in?
Two things I would do, and what I do for my customers. Thank you, Alex.
Yep.
Of any engine that comes to me, two things. Do you know it was running? And if it's a good, what I call a good runner, a good core, it didn't have any valve train issues, wasn't ran out of oil. We did two things. The oil pumps are problematic, so we put a new oil pump in every engine. If you brought us up to me and I said, just bring it back to me turnkey, it gets two things. Bare minimum oil pump, that forces us to drop the pan, clean the sludge out of it, see the condition of things, maybe catch something. That way you know you're starting from scratch. Clean oil, clean pan, clean screen, new pump. Giving it the best shot of its life. Number two, valve springs. And everybody goes, why valve springs? Well, factory rev limiter on these trucks, 5,800. First thing I do is bump it up to 65. You've got these seasoned, heat cycle valve springs that are now going to go 1,000 RPM past where they've ever gone. You don't have a lot of money in this engine. Somebody says, I don't care, I'll get another one. It's your time. So why drop a valve if you don't have to? Put an oil pump in it, $100-something, $100 set of valve springs in this thing. Put another $200 into it, gaskets, oil pump, valve springs, and that engine will treat you right. It really will. When you get into, I get all the time, oh, it smoked a head gasket, they're bad for head gaskets. The engine itself is not bad for head gaskets. What's killed the head gaskets is they're 20 years old, cooling systems are acidic, and now you're heating it and cooling it beyond what it's ever seen. You're disturbing the cooling system just as much as you're disturbing the oil system, and you can take a head gasket out. And as they get corroded, the passages just open up, and the mating surfaces get thinner and thinner, and it creates an issue. You gotta remember, these things have been around a long time already. So new is kind of a crazy term because, you know, we're talking, 26 years they've been around. So, no. 36 years. 36 years they've been out. So, wow. Crazy. So, yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? That was a random question, so that's cool.
Any tranny braces for the 60s and the 80s?
There isn't anything out there yet. I'm assuming somebody's going to make one for the 80s. A 60, I haven't seen a need. The only thing I could see that I would recommend somebody needs to make for a 60 would be a steel tail housing. If you're going to run in a mod car, you're allowed to run one. I did have a tail housing beat on the trans cross member because I didn't attach it. I poked a hole in it, ran it out of fluid. But that was, you know, anything can happen with what we do. Yeah. If you set an old school turbo 350 or 400 next to a 4L60, you will see the castings are completely different. They're very robust, very rigid. They got veins that go up behind the valve housing and everything. Because even in the late 80s, early 90s, GM factory four-wheel drive trucks were breaking bell housings just because it was so rigid, nothing was supported. So they had the lower shield that bolted on that was heavier duty, and they had the rods that went up, and they had these big braces that came off transfer cases because they were so heavy, and it became an issue. So as the engineers went on, and these trucks the new trucks go 300,000-400,000 miles, they're not breaking the factory bells. They design them pretty good. It's all ribbed and structured, and it's pretty cool. So, yeah.
Even them dust shields you talk about for the LAEs, they're like half-inch thick, I think.
They're pretty durable,
Yeah.
and just think of it as you know, there's an extra pair of hands just kind of holding up the back of the transmission the whole time. So if you had that versus a guy that doesn't, I would notice that guy because, yeah, I try to break his bell housing when I know I got a little bit extra support. Yep. All good? All right. Well, that's it. Any questions, you guys get a hold of me. I'll be back at my trailer. Like I said, we'll get this video up, try and get it up on my website. At the very least, we'll have it up on my Facebook page. And I will try to lay out the best I can. The picture's worth 1,000 words. I'm going to be like, this flex plate goes with this spacer and these bolts. this flex plate goes with this spacer, these bolts, and, hopefully that helps. Because there's been a lot of late night scrambling phone conversations, so.
I got a
Alright.
question.
Yep.
My buddy just bought one of them.
Yep.
And he put it in the back of his LS.
Yeah.
And it hit bolts. There's bolts on the back,
On the
spacer.
block saver,
Yeah.
yeah, so the back cover, the early LS's,
Yep.
the bolts stick out, they're flat.
Yep.
There's 3 bolts that stick out, I just take a flat wheel and knock them down one.
Okay.
Anything after 02, those bolts are inset and nothing sticks out past the belt. I could trim the block, or I could put a note in it. I'm trying to leave the meat in there, and I also try not to add a machining operation to keep costs down. So I can or I can't. Like I said, I literally, when I go to put it on, I just know some people don't know, and that's my fault. But I literally, they're sticking out, take the flat wheel, zzz, 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 stick it on. So, yep. Yep,
Harnesses,
yes.
you just run factory harness, delete what you don't need, tune it out with HP tuners.
Some guys do. Yeah, I tune with EFI Live, and our harnesses are 100% brand new, made from scratch. I don't wanna, there's a lot of companies out there that'll weed a harness for a couple $100, and I'm not stopping anybody from doing that. I can't base my business off of a 20-year-old harness that may have gotten yanked at the yard, have a green connection, or so on. So when I hand you a harness, I need to know it's good, to take that doubt out of it. Well, maybe it's a bad ground, maybe it's this, maybe it's, I can't do that. So, but there's a lot of people that, I've got a buddy, he says, I just take all the pinks and all the oranges and I twist them together and it'll fire right up. Okay, that's what you wanna do. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. But I've been running EFI in a derby car for 10 years now. And I won't go back. I couldn't go back. There's no comparison. EFI street stuff, I've been doing it since 2006. So I'm a huge fan of it. But I do sell turnkey carbureted engines if the guys don't want EFI. And we supply all that stuff, and I can still tune a carburetor and work on that stuff and fuel systems and all that stuff. I'm not scared of any of it, but for me, it's plug it in and go.
Right, and most of them now you can run E85 in them versus running fuel with gas,
It's no advantage.
no advantage.
Not as far as I'm concerned. You turn it right on gas, and if you want the cooling aspect or whatever, for me, you go right to methanol, not in between. So,
Is that a huge, price increase trying to go to methanol or the only injector?
it is versus using all the stock EFI stuff. You already got, your engine came with 8 injectors that you don't have to replace. It's a less expensive fuel system. Again, with the methanol on EFI, I've got a setup that works, and it's not about selling the parts, but it's proven, so it is a package. It comes with this pump, these injectors, and everything, and yes, there's a pricing point with it because it's brand new, heavy duty, badass. Oops, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Sorry. But yeah, to go from gas to EFI, here's the thing with EFI. It's great for somebody down south that doesn't use a lot of EFI at the gas station. They go get it at the pump, they can save money. If you're in an area where they seasonally change EFI, and you go from E85 and it's not 15%, it's 20, 25, 30,
Low.
you have to tune accordingly, right? Or you're gonna be too rich or too lean. So we sell them, we have them at the shop for the circle track guys, the little testers, right? You put the water in there and you shake it up and it'll tell you the percentage.
Mhm.
To gain what? There is a bit of an advantage, but to test the fuel, or you buy it by the drum, and then you know what you've got. But then it's expensive again. So I look at it this way, methanol's cheap. Buy by the drum, it's inexpensive. So if you want the benefits of the stable fuel, the cooling, the horsepower, the extra horsepower you can get, instead of doing this, just go right to it. So that's the biggest thing. I can't sell you an EFI or a methanol tune if what I'm getting out of the pump is different than what you're getting. Make sense?
More?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a generic, I'm not saying that's the hard fast, but that's the easiest way to blanket that statement, so. Yep. That's why vehicles have a flex fuel sensor, because it actually measures the amount.
Yeah, in the tank.
Yep, so that's self-tuning on that, so. There's companies out there that sell flex fuel, add-on flex fuel systems. Yep, that you can add to it. Be cool, have that in a derby car. Put your little E85 green sticker on
More
it.
things.
Well, that's just it. And then if you go to methanol, you know what you get. It comes out of a drum, it's clean, it's,
Yep.
you know, it's a product you're paying for. Yeah.
Did you ever try running methanol through the stock injector?
We tried some decap injectors, but it wasn't consistent. I've got a friend that can flow injectors, and we decapped, I think, 3 sets, and he could give me realistic numbers on them, and they were all over the map. You know, it worked out to be like a 70-pound-an-hour injector decap, but it was, you know, again, it's used stuff. And that's why I tell everybody a good running, even with the EFI. This came out of a Tahoe that drove in my shop. No noises, no misfire. That's the one you use. Not the one that's been sitting under the bench for 3 years, because those injectors are full of crappy gas and sludge, and yeah, you fire it up and then you're switching stuff around, and yeah. So, yeah, we did do it to try and see if it was a conceivable cheat. And I've heard guys are doing it.
There's so much methanol or so much methanol alcohol in fuel anyway.
Yeah. They don't get eaten up by it.
Right.
They're not eating, it's not eating the fuel rails or anything, there's no problem there. But if I sell it to you, if I take your
I
money,
get it.
I know it has to be dead nuts. So I'm sending you 8 injectors that I know are dead nuts. So, yeah. Alright. Alright, cool. Anybody else has any problems? Any questions, let me know. Alright, thanks guys.
Thank you.